I need to tell you something before we even get into today's news. My phone has not stopped buzzing since sunrise. Training camp is officially live for the Las Vegas Raiders, and within an hour of practice wrapping, my feed was already a mess of clips, quotes, and half-formed takes from every reporter who has eyes on this roster. So let me just talk to you straight, the way I would if you were sitting across from me right now. This is one practice, one single day, in shells, before anybody has strapped on full pads. Everything I'm about to lay out needs that filter attached to it. And yet, even with that grain of salt sitting right next to me, there were things I watched unfold today that made me physically lean forward in my chair. Something is moving in Vegas. Something is being built in real time. And I don't think a single piece of it happened by accident. Let's go straight for the storyline that's going to swallow every headline, whether people are ready for it or not. What's happening inside that quarterback room? Because from what's being reported out of camp, Fernando Mendoza spent his individual work with the second-team offense. And he didn't just get a cameo there either. He stayed embedded with that group for a real stretch of practice. Now sit with the other half of that picture for a second. Aidan O'Connell, a man who has literally started games at this level, who has NFL snaps on his resume, was working with the third unit. Read that again. That's not noise. That's not a coach randomly shuffling bodies because it's a Tuesday in July. That's a message, whether the franchise wants to admit it out loud or not. Now, before you fire off a message telling me the sky is falling, let me walk you through how this machinery actually works once the real season starts, because context changes everything here. Your QB1 and your primary backup are the two guys getting reps that are actually tied to game planning. They're preparing for whoever's next on the schedule. That third quarterback slot is a completely different animal. He's usually not being groomed at all. He's running the opposing team's offense on the scout squad, so the defense gets a live look. It's unglamorous. It's not about growth. It's about simulation, plain and simple. So when I watch Mendoza slide up into that second group while O'Connell gets pushed down to scout team duty, I'm not shocked. If anything, it confirms something a lot of us have been whispering about all summer. Kirk Cousins is the starter. Full stop. That conversation is closed. But underneath that, quietly, deliberately, this organization is building its future around Mendoza. So doesn't it track that the staff would start treating those two as the actual 1-2 punch heading into the year? This isn't a slight against O'Connell as a competitor or a person. It's simply where the franchise's eyes are pointed. But hold on, because I refuse to let this turn into an O'Connell pile-on. And honestly, I want to hand him some real credit here. If I'm being completely transparent with you, my personal hope is that O'Connell walks in and rips this job away from Cousins outright. Stay with me on this. Inside a system like the one Clint Kubiak is installing, I genuinely believe O'Connell has the traits to thrive. He's flashed real ability in the past. His timing is sharp, he's accurate when the structure around him holds, and an offense built on rhythm and quick reads could be the exact environment that unlocks him. And there's a business layer to this story that almost nobody talks about. Even in the scenario where O'Connell doesn't win the job and eventually walks in free agency, say a team like the Cardinals or the Steelers decides they need a steady, battle-tested arm and hands him something in the 10 to 15 million range, the Raiders still come out ahead. That kind of departure triggers a compensatory pick, likely a third or fourth rounder, landing right back in Vegas's lap. So his value never actually disappears, even in the worst case outcome. Smart front offices think in these terms constantly, even when they're not saying it publicly. It's not just about who wins the job in August, it's asset management, plain and simple. Now let's talk about how Mendoza actually performed out there, because honestly, this is the piece of today's news that has me the most fired up. One of the reporters who's been embedded with this team, someone known for catching the small details everyone else misses, described Mendoza as visibly more comfortable operating from under center during his second-team reps. His command of the huddle was called good, and that word is carrying a lot of weight in that sentence. Remember, all through OTAs and minicamp, Mendoza was mostly grouped with the rookies, still learning verbiage, still working through the installation basics. That phase is officially behind him. What we're watching now is the roster getting sorted according to where the staff genuinely envisions guys long-term, and Mendoza taking a real step forward under center is exactly the kind of trajectory you want out of a young quarterback this early in the process. Staying on that theme, guys locking into roles that actually mean something. Let's shift to the backfield, because rookie running back Mike Washington had himself a day. He was rotating with both the first and second team units, and if you understand how camp hierarchies function, that single detail tells you almost everything you need to know. During the offseason program, Washington was bundled in with the other rookies, guys like Trey Sermon, and ironically Mendoza before his own promotion. But that grouping wasn't a value judgment back then. It was just how teaching installation works for new players. We're past that now. The roster is being separated based on what the staff genuinely believes each player's ceiling looks like. And running backs at this stage generally fall into one of two buckets. You're either rotating with the starters and the twos, or you're scrapping for whatever's left with the back half of the roster. Washington is firmly living in that first bucket, and for a rookie, that's not a small thing to earn on day one. That's the coaching staff essentially saying, without a single word spoken, we trust you already. And I'll be honest, that has me even more locked in heading toward preseason, because I think Washington is going to see legitimate carries once the exhibition games start, and I want to watch what this kid does with the ball against actual opposing bodies. Keep in mind, this front office already tipped their hand a little by bringing in veteran names for workouts. Miles Sanders earlier this offseason, Najee Harris a few months before that. I wouldn't be shocked at all if another veteran body gets added to that room before week 1 arrives. But Washington already earning this level of early trust absolutely shifts the math on how urgent that need actually is. Now let's move to the tight end room, because there was a moment today that had the whole camp buzzing. Michael Mayer coming down with a diving grab during 7-on-7 work. That's the kind of play that gets clipped and replayed on a loop, and it deserves every bit of that attention, especially considering this is a contract year for him. And since we're on the subject of contracts, I need to say this plainly because it's something I feel strongly about. I genuinely hope this organization finds a way to lock Michael Mayer down long term. I'm not sitting here saying he deserves a $20 million a year contract. That's not grounded in reality. But somewhere in that 10 to 15 million range feels appropriate for what he brings to this roster. This is a player who's elite as a run blocker, and while he's not necessarily a burner down the field, I'm not buying into the idea that there's some enormous talent gap between him and tight ends around the league who are putting up flashier numbers. Look at Dalton Kincaid up in Buffalo, or Jake Ferguson down in Dallas. Those guys are productive largely because their offenses funnel volume their way consistently. Production follows opportunity. Give Mayer that same target share, and I have zero doubt he's producing comparable numbers. It's not always a talent gap. Sometimes it's purely about opportunity, and I think this new offense under Kubiak might finally be the system that gives him that chance, which leads into something a reporter covering practice pointed out today. This offense is leaning heavily into 12 personnel packages early on. That means Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer are frequently on the field at the same time, and you're also seeing Hayward mixing in reps at fullback as this scheme starts taking real shape. For those unfamiliar, Hayward was brought in as a veteran presence with some tight end background, but he's primarily viewed here as a fullback. Depending on how you want to classify his usage, we could be looking at an offense that regularly rolls out what's essentially 13 or 22 personnel. And if that's genuinely the direction this offense is heading, buckle in, because that tells me the Raiders are planning to run downhill and physical this season. We're talking smash-mouth football. And inside that structure, I expect both Bowers and Mayer to get real chances to make plays, especially Mayer. I'm not projecting triple-digit targets or anything unrealistic, but if he ends up somewhere around 50 legitimate opportunities across the year, I think we finally see exactly what this guy is capable of. He should be fully healthy walking into year 4, and with a contract situation hanging over his head, motivation certainly isn't going to be the issue. Let's shift over to the offensive line for a moment, because Jermaine Eluemunor was back on the field today, rotating with the second and third team units during 11-on-11 work. That's expected. Honestly, it was his first day reintegrating, and nobody should read too deeply into rotational reps for a guy still working his way back into rhythm. But here's a name I want to spend real time on, because it might be the most compelling storyline coming out of the entire defensive side of the ball. Zeke Matthis taking snaps with the first team defense. This isn't coming out of nowhere either. We actually saw the early signs of this developing back during mandatory minicamp, when Matthis started consistently working in with the top unit. And from what's being reported today, he was rotating between the 1s and 2s, which tells me there's a legitimate live competition happening at that cornerback spot, not just a formality being played out for appearances. My expectation right now is that Eric Stokes locks down one of the outside cornerback jobs, while Matthis and Darian Porter continue battling for the other. But here's the piece of context I think matters more than people are giving it credit for. Zeke Matthis was drafted under this new defensive regime, specifically under coordinator Bobby Leonard. Same story with undrafted free agent Caleb Alford. Leonard personally evaluated the tape on both of these players and decided they fit the scheme he intends to install. And from what I'm gathering, that scheme leans heavily into man-to-man coverage principles mixed with aggressive blitz pressure. That distinction matters because guys like Darian Porter, and to some extent even Eric Stokes, project more as zone-read corners in my eyes. Players who thrive playing off coverage, reading the quarterback's eyes and reacting rather than mirroring a receiver step for step in press. There's nothing wrong with that skill set at all. Stokes can absolutely still function in a hybrid role, playing with a cushion and reacting in real time. But if Bobby Leonard is genuinely building this defense around tight man coverage and disguised pressure packages, then a player like Matthis, someone specifically drafted with that exact scheme in mind, could realistically be looking at a path to starting reps sooner than most people are currently expecting. Watching him line up with the first-team defense today is a signal worth paying close attention to going forward. And it doesn't stop there. Another reporter covering the session confirmed this detail from a slightly different angle. Matthis wasn't simply rotating in with the starters. He was actually the very first cornerback out onto the field to open team period drills. That's a subtle detail, but it matters. Whether he holds on to that opportunity through the rest of camp remains completely up in the air, and Darian Porter absolutely has the talent to push back and reclaim that role if he outplays him. But right now, if you're asking me who holds the edge heading into the heart of camp, I'm leaning toward Matthis. And honestly, this fits into a much larger pattern I've noticed across this entire organization. Clint Kubiak arrived with a vision, and that vision is built around Kirk Cousins running his offense. Bobby Leonard arrived with his own blueprint, and that blueprint appears to be built around Zeke Matthis anchoring the cornerback room. Every corner of this organization is currently executing a plan they clearly believe in, and today felt like the first real glimpse of those blueprints actually hitting the grass. Whether any of these plans survive the grind of a full training camp and preseason is an entirely separate conversation for another day, but right now, the intent behind them is unmistakable. Not everything from today deserves a highlight reel treatment, though. I have to bring up Trey Tucker, because during a screenplay rep, he flat out dropped a catchable football, and I won't lie to you, that one stung to watch. The play design looked promising too. A numbers advantage building on the perimeter, a couple of linemen pulling out to lead the way, and the entire thing collapsed the second the ball hit Tucker's hands and didn't stay there. It's day one. I fully understand that drops happen, especially this early when timing between quarterback and receiver hasn't been ironed out yet. But when you're fighting for reps and roster security, moments like this tend to get remembered, even if they shouldn't define an entire body of work. On special teams, there was a rep resembling a field goal block period, with Nakobe Dean out there alongside Darian Porter rotating back in defensively. During that same sequence, somebody jumped offside early. It looked like Eric Stokes, which again, is just day one timing that gets cleaned up as camp progresses. You could also spot Max Crosby and Adam Butler mixed into what looked like a starting caliber grouping, along with Thomas Booker rotating through and Jeremy Chin working in the mix as well. None of this is groundbreaking on its own, but it does offer a small window into personnel groupings this staff is already testing. Now let's dig into the offensive line, because there's genuinely a lot to unpack here. According to the offensive coordinator, the current plan for rookie Trey Turner is to expose him to multiple positions early, get him comfortable across the board before figuring out where he ultimately settles once things naturally sort themselves out. Pair that with the fact that the starting offensive line group has stayed essentially unchanged since spring, and you start to get a much clearer picture of how this front office actually views the roster heading into the year. I know there was speculation, maybe even genuine hope in certain corners of the fan base, that Turner could push immediately for a starting job at right tackle or right guard. I'll be straight with you. I don't see that happening this year. Historically, players drafted in the later portion of the third round rarely walk directly into starting offensive line roles as rookies. That kind of instant impact happens more often with running backs or safeties. Offensive linemen typically need real development time before they're trusted with a starting job, especially at that draft slot. First and second round picks are a different conversation entirely, but this situation feels different. Honestly, the way I see it, the Raiders are developing Turner using the exact same blueprint they used with Jordan Meredith over these last couple of seasons. Cross-training him at multiple spots, getting him comfortable at guard, comfortable snapping center if the situation calls for it, maybe even working him in at tackle given his college background there. It mirrors the same approach they took with Cody Whitehair when he arrived, a player who can bounce between guard and center depending on what's needed. I don't think that pattern is a coincidence, and I don't think Turner starts anywhere significant this season. My read is that he spends this year soaking in the offense, building reps behind the scenes, and next season he's genuinely in the mix competing for a starting role once that foundation is fully built. As things stand right now, I expect Spencer Burford to hold down the starting left guard spot, with Jackson Paris-Johnson starting at right guard. But I want to add an important caveat here. I don't think either situation is locked in for all 17 games. We already know JPJ has dealt with injury concerns in years past, and if that trend continues, the staff could be forced into a change out of pure necessity rather than performance. That's really the story surrounding JPJ this year. The pressure is entirely on him to simply stay on the field. If he plays a full healthy season, I genuinely believe you're looking at a player performing at an an elite level, someone capable of anchoring this line for years. But if he goes down again, even during camp or preseason, I wouldn't be shocked if the organization starts exploring other options. I don't want that outcome. I want to see him prove the doubters wrong. But recent history has earned my caution here. There's also been some chatter floating around about Caleb Rogers taking a real step forward this offseason, with certain reporters suggesting he's looked noticeably sharper. And look, I respect the reporting, but I have to push back a little. Based on what we actually saw on tape last season, and knowing he hasn't even put pads on yet this camp, I have a hard time fully buying into the idea that he's made some dramatic leap already. An improved offseason program is genuinely great to hear about, but until I watch it translate onto the field in actual pads, I'm staying cautious. Compare that to Spencer Burford, a player who's already logged roughly 2,000 career snaps at this level. You know exactly what you're getting from him. Steady, dependable, not the type to get overwhelmed by speed off the edge, and still young enough to keep developing further. So for right now, my money stays on Burford holding that left guard job. That said, if Rogers really has taken the leap some people are suggesting, and it actually shows up once preseason football starts, there's a real chance he pushes Burford for that role. That's a storyline absolutely worth revisiting once we get live game reps to evaluate. And as for JPJ, I'll go on record right now saying I'd be genuinely surprised if he isn't the starting right guard when the regular season kicks off. Health permitting, I think he might be the most talented player on this entire offensive line unit. The tape backs that claim up completely. But like I said, availability is the variable that changes everything. And until he proves he can stay on the field for a full 16 or 17 games, that question mark is going to hover over every single conversation involving this line. So that's day one, fully in the books. A flood of small signals, a handful of surprises, and honestly, more storylines than I walked into this morning expecting. Mendoza's rise up the depth chart, O'Connell's uncertain path forward, Washington already carving out early trust in the backfield, Mayer flashing right on time heading into a contract year, Matthis making a legitimate push at cornerback, and an offensive line that's clearly still working out its long-term identity piece by piece. We're going to see a steady flood of new clips and notes trickle out over the coming hours as more of today's session gets processed, and depending on how much surfaces, I might be back later to break down whatever else comes out of it. But for right now, that covers everything worth knowing from the very first day the Las Vegas Raiders officially opened training camp.